This is Otterton Mill in Devon, and in here is one of the earliest industrial processes. This water turns this wheel, which turns this thing here, which turns a big millstone in there, to turn this into one of these. Everybody needed bread, so there used to be thousands of mills all over the country. This is Dotton. It's a couple of miles from Otterton. There used to be a mill here, but it was knocked down in the 1960s. The first record of a mill on this site, though, is in Domesday in 1086. We've never dug a mill before, so this site gives us a unique opportunity to look into part of what would have been everyday life for tens of thousands of people. We've got 900 years of history and just 3 days to untangle it. What is it that you find so exciting about mills?
I think they're really interesting structures and we don't know much about them. After all, there must have been many thousands of them in medieval England. And almost every community would have had one because it made grinding the corn, preparing the bread and everything that much easier. And yet we've done very, very little work on them.
Why not, if they're that exciting?
I think it's because of the way archaeologists work. You know, they're either working with sites that are going to be redeveloped, and they don't often seem to involve mills, or they're too small, really, to be part of big research projects that might get the money which archaeologists then spend 3 or 4 years digging. This is pretty well the first process where you harness a different sort of energy, i.e. water power, to alleviate all that work. So it's an industrial revolution in one sense.
This was the last mill building in Dotton. It was knocked down in the 1960s. We're looking for a date for when this building was put up and any sign of anything that may have come before it. There was a mill listed as being in Dotton in Domesday in 1086. But the big question is, has the mill always been in the same place? There are 3 main areas that hopefully will provide some answers in the form of dates. The water wheel would have sat in a deep pit. We'll look at how that was built. Inside was a gear pit to hold the gearing. We'll also try to find that. And there would have been a domestic area, the part the miller would have lived in. Hopefully we'll come across bits of pottery and household stuff that'll also help us with the dating. The mill sits here, on a road crossing the River Otter in South Devon.
Right, photo. Bank. Bank's over there, bank's there.
But first, Phil has got to work out where to dig.
Shall we help you a bit?
No. Look, presumably we're on a wheel pit, don't we?
Yeah, wheel pit there, but this photograph was taken from that field over there, looking this
that way.
Yeah.
Ah!
And where we're standing at the moment is just here. This is the mill. The mill was in this area here, coming down here, and at the bottom of it is the wheel somewhere in this position at the end of this leak that comes down here.
That's what we want, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, the wheel pit. I think the wheel pit would be the best feature to go for straight away because it'll be a big feature under the ground and will delineate the sort of at the end of the building.
Well, it's on the map.
That's where we should start doing the radar.
Start the radar here, yeah.
Look,
and
we
spread out from here.
don't need it.
No, you do. You may have good map evidence. We all know what Stuart's maps are like. But no, more importantly, Phil, it's the first time we've done a mill. We've not done geophysics or radar over a mill. It's important that we collect that data as a future reference.
John, we're not here for your groundbreaking geophysics. We're here to do a site.
It's the way it should be done professionally.
Look, we know where it is.
It will take us 5 minutes to do it.
I've heard that before.
Over here, Stuart.
Yeah, start here, Jimmy.
True to his word, within minutes, John's got something for Phil to look at.
That's where we reckon the wheel pit is. Then you see all these reflections going down. Those are actually within the mill building. And this is still inside the building, but suggesting we've got internal divisions.
Happy now, Phil makes a start.
That's in situ, isn't it, Phil?
That is in situ.
That's in
Oh,
situ.
that's good. Look at that.
Yeah.
Nice load of bricks, yeah.
Going straight down there, look.
Right.
So that's one side there.
This is Dotton. Here's the River Otter. This is the road that crosses the river. And the mill, where Phil is here. Just here, water's diverted from the river to the mill along a channel called a leat. The leat enabled the miller to control the flow of water to the mill. In the field across the road from the mill site, we can see remnants of where the leat might be along the base of the slope. How big was it? How powerful? And can we find a date for when it was dug? Helen opens a trench across it. The mill building is really two buildings in one. There's the industrial part of it, where the machinery would have been, and then there's the domestic side, where the miller lived. Using radar, John and his team have been trying to locate that end of the building. They think they've found it. So we open a trench just across here. Naomi's hoping to find more personal stuff here. Pottery and domestic material, which will give us some dates. In Phil's trench, we're coming across lots of bricks. And there's also a lot of metalwork that Phil doesn't recognise.
Martin, we got another of these pieces. What are
that's
they?
good, Phil. That's some reinforcing, I think, from the water wheel, where one of the arms, one of the spokes, joined the rim of the wheel, and it was all bolted together. We've got some very good bits of the water wheel, perhaps more than you would expect to survive. We got a lot of the ironwork that held it together, and we could get the size of some of the components from these as well.
The pieces in Phil's trench give us an indication of the size of the wheel. They fit together like this. It's a big wheel, about 3 metres across, probably dating from the Victorian period. Earlier on today, Helen put in a little trench over here to see if she could find the leat, which is the stream that they use for driving the water wheel. How'd you get on?
Oh, well, we've done brilliantly. We've got almost all of it. Let me show you.
What was it like digging this stuff?
Not bad. It's generally soft with a few hard lumps, but the particularly easy bit was when Ian was digging it with the mechanical digger, I'm afraid. This is the clearest bit. This is the lenses of little layers, puff pastry layers of grey and yellow, which have come from where the water was. This is the actual leat here. And then along here, again, incredibly obvious, these red stones are kind of stone lining to the leat itself. So we've got the whole of this side. The only thing we haven't got is the other side. It should be exactly the same on the other side, but it's underneath that great hill.
So do we know what date this wall is?
Well, if it's a stone wall, Mick, I think that means it's going to be before the 18th century, late medieval, 16th, 17th century.
Really? As early as that?
Yeah, well, the reason is if it was 18th or 19th century, it would be a nicely dressed stone wall, or it more likely would be a brick wall, and it's not.
And you think it's late medieval?
Late medieval? Yeah.
Helen, this is you. Late medieval.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's exactly what we wanted.
The work of this trench is now done. So we can now say it goes across here to Phil's trench, where it should join the wheel pit, if we have that. Phil, you got anything in your trench?
Of course I have. Got the wheel pit. This is the wheel pit. A lot of that's actually filled in, but we have got to the bottom of the wheel pit. And look at this. This brick wall is actually made out of recent bricks. They're frogged. Look, there's the imprint of the frogs.
Yeah.
But what we have got is the pivot point for the wheel. So the actual wheel would have pivoted on that point there. I mean, that is really good because it'll give us an opportunity to reconstruct just how big this thing was.
So this whole thing here, that is all the wheel pit?
That is the wheel pit.
It's a hell of a sized wheel, isn't it? This photograph of the mill is helping us make sense of the archaeology.
Is that it?
I think it might be, Phil.
Oh,
That's good. Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Stone to crows.
That's following the shape of the water wheel.
Oh,
We've done it.
yeah, there's a wall. There's a great wall there.
It's a fresh shot.
That's the where it comes in at a higher level.
Comes in at a higher level, either at the top or sort of halfway down the wheel.
Well, you was vindicated. Strip that back a little bit, you said. I want to see
I
that.
did,
You
I
said
did.
it was critical.
I did, and it is.
This wall's the same height as the wall to the side, which means that Mike's original thought was wrong. This isn't an undershot wheel like this. It's a breast shot one, like this. A much more efficient system. Off to one side of the wheel pit, we've come across a large piece of stone. Phil and I have a look at it.
Well, where should the middle be?
In there somewhere.
We're practically up to the cameraman's waist in debris.
Is that something in the middle?
A hole.
A hole in the middle.
What is round in a mill with a hole in the middle?
A polo. Oh, you mean this whole thing is the hole? So it's been blocked up?
Wow. I mean, that's hollow.
It's a puzzle, isn't it, Mike?
I wonder if we should be taking the machine to clear the top off here so we can get a really good look, Phil.
I think you're actually probably right.
Right, to be continued. Phil now has his millstone. And it's a beauty. But can Martin date it?
It looks to me as though there might be 3 or 4 grooves coming off of the central
In
hole
here?
there. Down here.
One there.
Can we clean it up a bit and just have a look? The curving shape of those certainly pushes the date of this back. I mean, this is 17th, 18th century millstone, I would say.
That fits in with some of the pottery we've been looking at, surely.
Oh, lad, look at that. Isn't that a strange shape?
The key is this bit in the middle. The shape of this dates the stone as 17th century. The dates are all beginning to tie together. We now have the floor of the domestic part of the mill building. It too is a beauty. This was probably the kitchen floor. We decide to lift a section of it to see if we can see signs of any earlier flooring. Across the road in the other field, Helen and Bridge are drawing a blank. They've found the continuation of the leat. This wall is one edge of it. But there's no sign of a wheel pit, and the building doesn't seem to be attached to the leat. It's not looking like an earlier mill, and dating is a problem.
It's either before, during or after, but we don't know which yet.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's a big piece of wood.
That is interesting, isn't it?
This is a piece of the water wheel. It's the rim.
How do you know that?
Well, look, you've got a really nice curve there, and we've got a lump of wood here, which I think is part of the base of the paddle.
And what are these lumpy bits?
Well, we've got bits of pins for holding the paddles in place.
Late 19th century?
Late 19th century, judging by the guy with the flat cap.
Late 19th century doesn't sound much, really, but actually it's 150 years ago, virtually, isn't it? In his trench, Phil started digging. But there's a problem. There's more wood, but there also seems to be concrete.
Oh, what the hell? This is confusion, Mike. Because there's actually a piece of timber. This timber is coming right in underneath there.
Underneath the concrete?
Underneath the concrete. I reckon that concrete's going to have to come up, one way or the other.
In the field across the lane, Helen's search for an earlier mill has come to an end. She was looking for signs of a wheel pit, but there isn't one. She's now found most of the leat running from Phil's trench across the field she's been working in. But there's no sign of any building that might be a mill, and no sign of any structure other than what was probably a house.
We've opened 2 holes in it, looking for an earlier mill on this site, and I think what we have shown is that we haven't found a mill, and there's no need for a mill in this field. Everything connected with the leat is going over to that one.
Well, that's really important, isn't it? Because
Yep.
up until now we've had circumstantial evidence that there's only been one site for a mill here because that's the best site that there could possibly be.
Yep.
Now the archaeology is confirming it.
Absolutely, it certainly is here. Yes, this is all leat connected with that mill.
In fact, the leat turns out to be the key to dating the site of the earliest mill. Analysing the various maps, we realise that the key map is that of the parish. This is the parish boundary. On this side, the parish boundary is the leat. As the leat's man-made and doesn't follow any natural feature, this means that the leat must have been here when the parish boundary was laid out. And that pushes it and the mill right into the 10th or 11th century, before Domesday. Back at the main site, just off to the side of where Phil's digging, we've found a second millstone. But the quality of this stone's very poor.
It's such rubbish stone, isn't it?
Well, it is.
When you think we're in a county with Dartmoor granite, with ports that you can bring stone in from the French Basin, Forest of Dean's not far away, what are they doing using rubbish like that?
It's a new red sandstone sort of conglomerate type.
Yeah.
And it's very unusual. In fact, it's the first one I've ever seen in Devon.
But they would have had grit in their grain, wouldn't they, if they'd have used that?
Well, they would, but I suspect it was used, at least latterly, for grinding animal feed with.
Ah, right.
So it wouldn't have mattered quite so much, or maybe coarse grinding of some sort. But I think the other thing is it tells us a bit more of the story that this wasn't a particularly prosperous mill latterly, that they weren't buying good quality millstones in.
So that's in great contrast to the 5 shilling at Domesday, which was a lot of money.
Well, it is indeed, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yes, it shows how, over a period of 1,000 years, the life of a mill can change enormously.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have the wheel pit, but we also have this other pit called the pit wheel. This held the gearing to turn the millstones. We do have rather a deep hole where the pit should be.
Stone of crows.
If this is the pit wheel, then it is going to be a deep slot. Almost as... Well, it has to be almost as deep as the water wheel.
That is a hell of a hole down there, isn't it? What a... Hey?
And there's also this big metal lump here.
Something.
It do, done it. I mean, do you want to see if we can get this out?
I think we should go for it, yeah.
Well, it looks like the pit wheel, or part of the pit wheel.
Well, what's this bit?
This is the rim of the gear,
Right.
where the wooden cogs were mortised in. This would be the working face. Have it upright.
So vertical, Martin?
Yes.
That was going to be my
yes,
next
vertical
question.
gear. And these mortises are for the wooden cogs that were in the face of the gear to mesh with the rest of the gearing in the mill.
So why are you using wooden cogs?
Well, this was a fairly large diameter gear, and in the early days they couldn't cast to good tolerances, and 2 cast iron gears running together would have been very noisy and put a lot of stress on each other. So the larger gears were often made with mortises cast in them to put wooden cogs in, which were all paired and prepared by hand, and it made for much quieter and safer running.
The cog in the centre is the piece of gear we've now found. This linked the water wheel to the millstones. It was a key part of the mill equipment. We've now plotted the internal walls of the building and have a good idea of how the inside of the last mill building on the site worked. The last building on this site seems to have been put up in the 18th century. Our earlier walls and the millstones date from the late 17th century. But the finds take us further back to the early 1600s. The wheel pit has early bricks and even earlier stone at the base. And right at the end of day 3, Phil's come up with the goods once again.
You know this piece of timber that starts there?
Yeah.
Well, I managed to trace it along, and actually, I've got it still going right through to there. It's going underneath the wall. So that piece of timber has either got to be earlier than that wall, or at the very least the same date.
As a sort of foundation timber.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think we're looking at a medieval material, unquestionably.
But I think you see the topographical situation of the place argues that it's earlier even than the structural stuff, because this mill leat that runs right the way through is the parish boundary. That's likely to have been fixed in the 10th or 11th century. Dotton's on this side of that. There's a very limited area, perhaps about 50 metres on the side of it you could put a mill. We've tested it with 3 or 4 trenches. This is the most likely place for that. So, you know, it's not just that it's 400 years old, 500 years old, it's likely to have been here for 1,000 years.
When this building was demolished in the 1960s, it wasn't just the end for a building that was a couple of hundred years old. It was the end of almost 1,000 years of milling on this very spot.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
In 1998, a series of chance finds scattered across this field near Manchester inspired a local enthusiast to start field walking. And for 8 years, he's been walking and walking and walking. Now, after hundreds of hours of close scrutiny, he's accumulated evidence of over 8,000 years of human activity, from the prehistoric to the post-medieval. But it's the Romans who seem to have been particularly active. There's loads of metalwork, including coins, brooches, and this gorgeous little snake bracelet. But the site itself remains an archaeological mystery. So what was going on here? Local archaeologists believe they've discovered a fortlet, but then not all the finds are military, and they cover over 250 years of the Roman occupation. So what were the Romans doing here in Warburton? We've got just 3 days to find out. Warburton's located near Manchester, between the River Bollin and the Mersey. The village can be traced back to the Anglo-Saxon period, and its parish church is dedicated to St Werburg, the Anglo-Saxon saint from which Warburton takes its name. But over the past 8 years, the locals have been finding evidence which has pushed back Warburton's origins much further. That's a pretty impressive array you got there, James.
It is, isn't it? We've got stonework here from the prehistoric with the flint work. We've even got Bronze Age, a small axe there, which is really nice. But what's really excited me on this side is all the Roman material, the brooches and some of the coins and the various little bits and bobs.
What do you think it all means, Mike?
We've got quite a lot of material here from the Roman period, which is distinctively military, the brooches in particular, and these nice little rings. But we don't get, usually, in the northwest, this kind of concentration. If we're looking at military, I think we could be looking at something like a fort or a fortlet.
It does seem to me to be a bit of a leap of the imagination. From a few finds to an imperial fort with loads of soldiers hacking away at the poor Brits.
But we do have a bit more evidence. The local Archaeology Society have put in 1 or 2 trenches already in the field, and they've got what might be an enclosure, and in one of those trenches there's a ditch, a Punic-style ditch.
What's a Punic ditch?
It's a trap, a Roman military trap.
Francis, could this site be a trap for the enemy?
Well, I think you've got to be a bit, a bit sceptical, because I've seen steep-sided ditches on farms, and to my eye, that metalwork doesn't look military. I think it could be a farm. I think we've got to be very, very careful. Rectangular enclosure doesn't mean fortlet.
So we're putting in our first trench next to the previous excavation so that we can look at the form of this ditch and decide whether it really is Punic. And this will tell us for definite whether the site's military. David, what was the difference between a Punic ditch and any other kind of ditch?
It has a standard V-shaped inner slope, but the outer face is vertical or near vertical, which means that once you've got in there, it's extremely difficult to get out, and you become a sitting duck to the defenders to throw anything at you.
Why were they called Punic ditches? Does that mean they came from Carthage, as in the Punic Wars?
No, they didn't actually come from Carthage, but the point was that the Romans thought the Carthaginians were extremely treacherous, and these ditches were meant to be treacherous to anybody who attacked across them.
As the field walkers continue to march across the field, we still can't be sure whether our Romans were soldiers or farmers. But the finds are coming in thick and fast, and we're hoping they'll give us a clue.
Have we got much? Bits and pieces. There is a lot of this stuff that looks like brick, isn't there? I wonder if any of that's going to turn out to be the good Roman pottery.
It is, it's just bloody sand, isn't it? Just sand, sand and more sand. It's like digging at Bournemouth, isn't it?
At our trench, it looks as though the Romans are about to make an appearance.
Mike, there's your ditch.
That looks promising, doesn't it?
So it does look as though that charcoal was coming out the other side, right on the edge of it.
I'll be happier when we got it sectioned.
Yeah, Francis, you put in a long jump pit.
Well, look at this.
Hey, have we got something?
Yeah, look at that. Well, careful, it took us all morning to find that.
Oh, wow. Rarely on day one have I ever seen such a cornucopia of finds. Time's of the essence since we've only got one day to explore the whole field. So everyone gets busy. Everyone, that is, except Phil, who's refusing to be dragged away from yesterday's trench. And Helen's still got loads of James's finds to double-check.
It's quite worn on that edge.
So that's fixed into the wood of the cart somehow, is it? In the
I think it is. I mean, it's some way of distributing straps around around the cart.
So a rain travels through that.
Yes, yes.
First century AD.
Yeah, I mean, a rain would have run through there because you've obviously got quite a lot of wear on this edge here. It's gone quite thin.
Okay.
And at our original field, Phil's tenacity has paid off. And yes, he's got a result from his trench. I've never been quite sure why we've explored quite this far out in the field.
Well, if you remember, there was metalwork that was coming off the crest. There were two concentrations, and Phil's trench was to come down the hill and follow that metalwork. Well, actually, it's been much better than that. We've found 2 lynchets.
What's a lynchet, Phil?
Well, it literally is an old field system. What you've got to imagine here, Tony, is literally a stairway of fields running parallel to the slope. And what is happening is that plough soil, as you plough along the slope, soil moves down the slope. And where Francis is, you will have a bank. And down here, you've got a cutaway terrace. You can see here that you've got a dark brown topsoil. That's this stuff, and it comes straight onto natural. Now, as we come down the slope, we've got 3 layers. We've got the dark topsoil, but in the middle, we've got this brown material, which is sloping down here, and at the bottom, we've got the natural. And this brown material is where the plough has actually sliced into the natural and moved all the soil down that way. So you'll have a bank here, and here there's a big cutaway. And so you've got a whole series of stairways. And you can see that the next cutaway terrace is up there where the chap is there. So you've got these fields that are about, what, 20, 30 metres wide, going down the hill.
Do we have a date for these lynchets?
Well, we've got scrappy pottery from the bottom of this lynchet that runs through the Roman 16th century and 18th and 19th century. So we might have 2,000 years of agriculture ploughing on this site.
But the important thing is that is exactly when the metal finds were being made. That is exactly the date of all those metal objects.
What's exactly the period? The medieval or the Roman?
Roman into medieval period.
This was a purely agricultural landscape, but we now understand the mechanism by which it formed.
And until we dug this trench down here, we had no indication that there was a pre-existing field system on this hill. The only field system that we could see was the present field system. This shows that there was a completely different landscape here in the Roman and probably the medieval period.
Which is why it's not on the 18th century map, because these fields are totally different.
So finally, we're beginning to reveal the history of this landscape. The lynchets are evidence of an earlier terraced field system, possibly Roman. And this would explain how the finds got into the soil, as rubbish mixed in with the manure which fed the crops.
Well, Stuart, we're getting wildly overexcited about 2 lynchets out there. How do they fit into what we know about the landscape?
I mean, if you go back to the medieval period, what you've got is the medieval village of Warburton here in red. You've got a church down here and a priory, arable ground here, meadow around the edge, and park and manor centre up here, and the peat and mosslands over here. But you've got a strip of open ground, all suggesting that this strip where our fields located is the pasture for the animals of Warburton village and the parish.
So that's the pasture on which you'd have had the animals that would have manured the arable.
That's right. This is quite important in the understanding of this. Also, the pattern of movement actually is along that road that's there today, the road that we come along, leading from Durham straight down to Warburton and then crossing over the river. The Mersey itself is an important boundary in the Saxon period between Mercia and Northumbria. And if there's Saxon occupation close to a major boundary, there's a very strong chance there might be even Roman occupation.
So those lynchets that we found are likely to predate the medieval pasture, you reckon?
Indeed, yeah, I mean, I would say that quite categorically from the evidence I can put together, yes.
So Phil begins to dig a trench in the new field over the biggest response to see whether there are any finds and to analyse how they got into the ground.
Is that in the spoil that's coming out, or is that in the... Could it be really, really small, or can't you?
Oh, it is very small, yeah.
It seems to be pretty localised, doesn't it? Is it in there, for example?
No. Let's try that for what I've got in my hand. No.
Try that. In there, then?
It's over in that corner somewhere. Must be very, very small, whatever it is. Lead.
Well, I'm damned.
It's a lead seal. You know the seals that they put on the bags? That's what I think it is.
It's quite a nice little pattern on there, isn't it?
Our prize find. Who needs Roman when you've got a seal from a 19th century seed bag? The field's now littered with trenches, and Helen takes a quick tour to see what's turning up.
No features?
We're nothing.
No. Anything good?
Well, the last bit that came up, courtesy of the detector, was that.
Oh, yeah.
It's the last bit we came out.
Yes, looks good on that side, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And not much on the other side, probably half a button. Never mind. OK, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
This whole field is dotted with tiny, discreet test pits, and suddenly we've got Phil's zonking great hole. What's that all about?
What we're hoping to prove is that there's a different pattern of finds in the top as opposed to that bit there.
There.
Yeah, then the subsoil, and then on the natural and in features underneath there.
And how are you getting on, Phil?
By and large, all the finds that we get, and they're mainly Victorian, post-medieval. The main thing is that we're recovering all the finds, not just being selective with metal. And certainly, once we get through the topsoil, which is where most of the finds are, once we get into the subsoil, we're not getting anything at all.
So what does all this tell us?
It's telling us quite a lot. I mean, it's telling us that this soil has to be manured. That's where most of these modern finds are finding their way in. And then it's also telling us that below that there's a rather different soil, which may represent pasture, and then possibly earlier fields are beneath that. But that earlier soil wasn't being heavily manured.
A bit frustrating for you, though, all this digging empty trenches.
I spend my entire life digging holes and finding nothing. I went with Ian, you know, the main digger driver here. He and I dug 1,800 metres across Salisbury Plain in 4 days. And what do we find? One post hole. Was I disappointed? No, of course I wasn't disappointed. The main thing is you solve the problem. We came here 3 days ago. We came here with a set of questions. We wanted to know about the forklift. We wanted to know about the metal objects in the plough saw. And I think over those 3 days, we've answered the specific targets.
I know what did really hack you off, though. The local pub didn't serve real ale.
Yes, you're right there.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Welcome to the Castles, a massive stone enclosure the size of a football pitch. And for once on Time Team, there's plenty of archaeology on the surface. So what's the big mystery? With 5,000 tonnes of stone right in front of us, this should be easy. Well, in fact, for hundreds of years, this site's baffled everyone who's seen it. It's been called everything from an Iron Age homestead to a Roman prison to a Dark Age stronghold. So what was it really? When was it built? And who was the king of the castles? We've only got 3 days. Is that enough time to find out? The remains of the castles lie near Hamsterley, 20 miles southwest of Durham in the Wear Valley. Sitting on the side of a hill in a sheep farm, the site's a huge dry stone enclosure measuring approximately 70 by 90 metres. Now overgrown with trees, its crumbling walls still form a monumental structure. But even so, no one knows what it is or when it was built. So the team stormed the castles, with our environmental archaeologist Emma beginning to core the enclosure ditch. This is the best place to find organic remains which might give us crucial dating evidence. While Emma gets her first taste of the site, Stuart's scouring the perimeter of the enclosure to see how the stones stack up in the landscape. And Henry and Phil begin to survey the wall to find a location for a trench, because if we dig down to the foundations and uncover the ground it was built on, we might reveal some finds to give us a date. We're also putting in another trench across the north wall, hoping to learn more about its construction and locate the early ground surface and datable artefacts. By digging on this side, we've got less stone to shift, since the wall's least built up here. So John's hooked up with Frank the farmer to tap into his local knowledge and see if he can narrow down a target.
But there's evidence of ridge and furrow ploughing from the past in here.
Well, I would say the ridge and furrow would be done in the 1800s. They've left this area in the middle. I would say the reason they have left it was because they've obviously hit an obstruction. In Hodgkin's report, he claimed that they dumped stones in the central area here when they'd cleared it because it was so wet. But if you're clearing land, you wouldn't put your stones right in the middle.
You'd go to the side.
You go to the periphery, especially when you've got all this area to dump your stones on.
So this could be a good target for us to look at in the first instance?
I would say it definitely does need looking at, yes.
John begins to geophys the interior to find evidence of internal structures. Since working out a date's one thing, but understanding its function is even more of a challenge. In the entrance, we're trying to discover if there's a second guard chamber. But since the castle's is basically a massive dry stone wall, it's hard to tell fallen rubble from standing remains.
Does it have had any kind of bonding material at all?
Well, sometimes with these dry stone structures, they used to put clay bonding, almost like a putty in between the stones, but it washes out with the rain. I think you're still in rubble there, actually, Matt.
The longer we're here, the more of a mystery this place seems to be.
It's one of County Durham's least understood sites.
What are the stories about it?
In the 1st century, this area was occupied by the tribe of the Brigantes, and their relations with the Romans were quite turbulent at times, and the theory goes that the castles could have been a refuge when they were defeated in a major battle near their main base near Stanwick.
What else?
Another one is it was a Roman penal colony where slaves working in neighbouring lead mines were kept. Now, both of these suggestions are theoretically possible. We're not that far from Stanwick, and there are lead deposits in the area. But there's no real evidence for either.
So it's one of those things where people tell a story about a place and after a while everyone just believes it?
Yes, it's sort of fiction becoming fact or speculation becoming fact.
The Castles is steeped in legend, but this just increases our challenge to separate the fiction from the facts. Stuart, this place is called the Castles and you've got this massive stone wall here and you've got this big gully here which looks like it ought to be defensive, but if you look up there you would imagine if it was a castle it would be nestled right on top of it, but it isn't. It's almost as though it were in the lee of the hill.
You summed this site up really well because it's not defensive at all, is it? I mean, you could stand on that slope there and almost lob a flaming torch straight inside that enclosure.
Absolutely.
It's not a defensive feature, it's chosen for other reasons. It's a bit like Iron Age stone cladding. That's the best way to think about it. People are starting to show off in the landscape, demonstrating this is their area. We won't properly understand it until we start to look at its location in relation to the stream valleys, the hill slopes, all around.
It's called the Castles rather than the castle. Do you think originally it would have been lots of separate structures?
No, I think that's a red herring to some extent. It's just how farmers refer to things that they didn't quite understand. It looks like a collapsed castle to them, so they call it the Castles. It's of no significance whatsoever, that name.
In the interior, the archaeologists have opened 2 more trenches on the site of the antiquarian's old excavations. Their central position is the most likely place for occupation. Hodgkin had found stones here, and we want to check out whether they could be evidence of structures. As the new trenches get underway, our north wall trench has come to its end.
So I see Naomi's doing the recording here. Does that mean we've finished with this trench now?
Yep, we're closing this trench up.
So what did you decide in the end?
Well, actually it's really interesting. What we've actually got is them using the natural slope. So
Right.
here, what Naomi's sitting on is actually the natural.
Right.
And it
that's all
slopes
orangey,
down.
yellowy stuff down
Yeah.
there. So is that set back into the mound then?
Yep. Yeah, it is.
And the $64,000 question, any fines from it?
No, you were right, none at all.
Yesterday we concentrated all our efforts on the exterior walls so that we could understand when and how they were built. On the north wall, Faye thinks that she might have located the original ground surface and is still searching for any datable finds. We're also beginning to learn how the site was constructed, as Naomi and the team clear tons of fallen rubble from the southern wall. While over at the entrance, we've moved mountains to expose the gateway. But how does it fit in with the original guardhouse? Why did we put this trench in?
Well, this is slap bang in the middle of that big geophysical anomaly that John picked up. And we actually positioned the trench so that we thought there was going to be a wall line going slap bang through the middle there.
I can't see a wall line.
No, it doesn't look like there's anything here.
What about the trench down there?
Yeah, well, come down and have a look at it.
Well, there doesn't seem to be much more in this one.
Well, you see, the idea of putting this one in is working on the assumption, as Francis said. Here we are in an Iron Age enclosure. Where is the most likely place for the building to be? Now, if you look back through there, we are slap bang in line with the main entrance. And in fact, we are slap bang in the middle of the enclosure, which is the most likely place for the high status building. Now, if we assume that anybody but Mr. and Mrs. Clean and Tidy was living here, you'd expect to find some traces that they lived here.
But we know there was ploughing here. Couldn't it be ploughed out?
This trench is placed on a ridge, so the archaeology is more likely to be preserved underneath it, and the furrows are on either side.
Afternoon of day 2, and with no internal structures or finds, the castles is still frustratingly mysterious. So we're throwing every means of investigation at the site. Emma's still coring, and we're opening another trench in the interior. But over at the southern wall, the archaeologists may have made some progress.
Really pleased about this, Mick. We've actually got the bottom of the wall. Look at that.
Oh, good.
It's actually sitting on that yellow natural there.
Yeah. So is it on an old ground surface down there?
No, it's not. And
Right.
that's really interesting because it means that they're going to have cut into the slope and created a kind of linear terrace to build it on. And the reason they've had to do that is because we've now been able to measure from face to face, which is another good thing, 5.1 metres wide.
Crikey.
So it's a hell of a thing, isn't it?
That's interesting, because when I was talking to Faye about the top rampart that's parallel with this, they did the same there.
Oh, really?
So it means they terraced that top in, they terraced this one in. I wonder what they did with the sides, because they run up the slopes.
So they're either going to have got a sort of ramp effect cut in, or they're going to have done it in a series of steps, aren't they?
So still no date, but at least the archaeology is consistent. Both the northern and southern walls were built on terraces into the natural hill slope. It's just so frustrating we've got no idea what the walls were enclosing.
No then. Oh, that's quite good, isn't it?
Cobbles underneath.
Yeah. So that's continuous with this lot of cobbling?
Yeah. That puts quite a big camber on the road, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
We now know that the entrance was built with a finely cobbled surface covered with paving slabs. This is a heck of a long trench. What have you done to justify it?
Well, we've got both sides of the original wall now, from that flat flag to that. It's 5.1 metres. We've bottomed the wall on each side and demonstrated it's sitting on a terrace. It's a deliberate, artificially cut terrace overlooking this slope down.
If we've got that edge there and that edge there, but then on top of that you've got all this rubble, doesn't that imply that originally the wall would have been much taller?
Oh, yeah, 5 metres wide width. Just screams height to me. 3 metres wouldn't amaze me as an original height. And that, overlooking that valley, would look incredible from that far side.
That's almost as tall as you. What have we got on this side?
Well, Naomi's just putting in a little extension there.
What's the extension for, Naomi?
Well, Tony, as you can see, we've got these stones here. I know there's stones absolutely everywhere, but these stones are much flatter. They look much more purposeful, as opposed to those tumbled, angular stones over there.
So what are you going to do with them?
Well, we want to take this back and just see if we've got something real.
Don't those look rather like the ones that we found up there?
Well, that's the whole point, really. The way they're pitched and the size of the stones, even in the material they're set in, they're pretty much exactly like the stuff in Faye's Trench up there.
So, do you think it could be something like the base of a roundhouse?
Well, we're hoping so, fingers crossed, yeah.
We can only check it out, can't we?
We can only hope, yes.
After 2.5 days of struggling to find any evidence of occupation, we might have found not one, but 2 roundhouses within the enclosure. Our potential roundhouses fit in perfectly with our Iron Age model. But as digging continues in the interior, things are beginning to go pear-shaped.
Yeah, that now looks like a bit of a bend at the end of a straight line of stones, doesn't it? It's not looking very roundhouse-like, more like a boat.
Yeah, and also we've got more stones coming behind me.
Yeah.
So I think we've got quite a bit more work to do.
All very well, but it's nearing the end of day 3 and there's still loads of work to do to confirm whether we've got our other roundhouse by the southern wall. Earlier on, our environmental archaeologist Emma got really excited about one patch of soggy earth down there.
I have, absolutely. This is the best waterlogged deposit we've got from the site. It's going to have the seeds and the beetles in that I need to tell us what was going on in the enclosure.
How do you know they're seeds and beetles from a long time ago? Why couldn't they just have dropped here in the last couple of years?
Well, they're sealed by the topsoil and they're at the same sort of level as all the floors across the site. Would you like to see some?
Yeah.
There you go.
And are there any seeds and beetles in here?
There surely are. Would you like to see what I found?
Yeah.
Well, we got seeds that suggested that there's a lot of activity and disturbance in the enclosure, which could be humans or animals. But we also got beetles, and we've got a specific sort of beetle that's associated with accumulations of like quite nasty sort of waste associated with human habitation and dung and manure.
So that's what this earth's made of?
There's a good chance.
Thank you for sharing it with me.
So these are the stones, Mick, that we thought were part of the roundhouse.
A lot cleaner now, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a lot cleaner, but as it's been cleaned up, we've seen that these stones are straight and form part of a rectangular building. Right, so it can't be Iron Age, I don't think, but at that end, it's cut by those furrows.
So what date are they?
1780 was when this land was enclosed, so...
Right, so a pre-18th century building, but not Roman or medieval, presumably?
No. I think you're looking at something a little bit earlier than that, earlier than the medieval. You have that cell thing over there.
Yeah.
That might be Dark Age.
So it looks as though any Iron Age roundhouse that might have been here has been ploughed away. And instead, we found a square, potentially Dark Age structure, which would have been contemporary with the Dark Age guardhouse at the entrance. Tony, you've been fettling away all day trying to sort out whether this is just a tumble of stones or whether it could be something to do with the Iron Age people we think lived here. Have you come to any conclusion yet?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's structural now, Tony.
Why do you say that?
Well, the stones are nicely laid, they're nicely flat. They have exactly the same relationship to the underlying ground surface as does the main enclosure wall. They're just covered with this hill wash.
But these stones here, they're not really flat, are they?
No, that could be the wall which encloses these flat flagstones.
So what do you think they might be?
Well, we've got the geophysics just in this area. We've got a nice square edge on each side of it, just about under the polythene there, a little way that way.
So it's not a roundhouse?
It's not a roundhouse, but it could be something like a stockyard, something like that, a sort of rectangular stockyard under the shelter of the wall.
It's great that at last we've got some kind of structure inside our enclosure, isn't it?
It's a real relief. It's absolutely great, isn't it?
Although this roundhouse has also turned out to be square, we still believe it's Iron Age since it was built at the same time as the enclosure and was probably used as a cattle pen lying in the shelter of the wall. So our 3-day siege has brought us closer to untangling the age-old mystery of the castles. The enclosed farmstead was built in the Iron Age. Its 5-metre thick stone walls would have stood 3 metres high, and the eastern entrance was fronted by 2 massive stones flanking an impressive wooden gate. There would probably have been a large stone roundhouse positioned opposite the gate. Stone cattle enclosures were built in the shelter of the walls, which would have protected the livestock. Later in the Dark Ages, the gate was modified and a substantial guard chamber added. The central roundhouse was replaced by a square building. This is our best bet for a building, but what strikes me is the contrast between the massive presence of this monument in the landscape and the few fragments of evidence we've got for the people who lived here. Even though I'm standing right by something they built, the only things that we've found that have got anything to do with the people are these tiny bits of beetle. This monumental structure has been an enigma for centuries, but by pulling together a team of experts, from archaeologists to stone wall builders, we're at last clearly beginning to see its identity, even if the identity of the people who actually lived here remains tantalisingly just out of reach.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.